Welcome back to the Rural Resurrection YouTube channel. I'm Chris Silver, creator and editor of Rural Resurrection blog, driven to help your community not just survive, but thrive. Hopefully you'll like today's video on active mobility planning. If you do, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. Today we're talking about active mobility planning. In the past, we've referred to this as bike and pedestrian planning, but active mobility is much more than that, which we'll get into. I have with me today Craig Melke from Benish and Cale Broderson from the city of La Vista. Craig, can you please tell our audience more about yourself?
Sure, Chris. Hello, Rural Resurrection community. My name is Craig Melke, and I'm a consultant and an environmental planner with Benish.
Cale, can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, Cale Broderson, Associate City Planner with the City of La Vista. Been with the city for about 6 years, and I was the project manager on our active mobility plan that we worked with Benish to compile.
Cale works with me at the city of La Vista, a small suburb of Omaha, Nebraska. Although we've depicted trails in La Vista's comprehensive plan in the past, the city has never had a dedicated bike and pedestrian plan. This has hindered development historically in La Vista, as much of the community was developed without a trails plan to lean on. Founded in 1960, La Vista epitomizes suburban-style development, so incorporating trails after the fact, rather than with new developments based on new planning document, has made developments of a cohesive system problematic. This is where active mobility planning comes in. Craig, what is active mobility planning?
Great question, Chris. So in the past, active mobility may have been referred to as active transportation. Active mobility, though, really just refers to any non-motorized, human-powered, or electric-assisted way of getting around without a car. And so this can be used for work, errands, school, recreation, getting around, rolling, strolling, biking on two wheels or three wheels, and for any purpose. Really, it's about improving lifestyles and being a more holistic view of how to get around. The overall study purpose of the active mobility plan for La Vista was to improve access and mobility for all users within and through La Vista. La Vista sits within the middle of the Omaha metropolitan area, and so there's a lot of trails and things that go through La Vista, and to have people coming through La Vista being able to get off the trails and get into town and get to neighborhoods and things like that, that was very important. And as Chris mentioned earlier, the city of La Vista doesn't really have a defined east-west route internal to the city. We're bordered by Harrison on the north and Giles on the south. There's not a single way to get through town. And so trying to find a way for people to get through the city without a vehicle was one of the primary study goals. And then also looking for ways to, get some stuff on the ground, get some projects or some policies on the ground that would make people feel like the city is making progress. And then developing an overall list of projects that may be implemented over time, over a greater period of time, provided when funding is available and projects come along. And as Chris said, having a planning document for the future is very important to improving active mobility.
So tell us how the project started here for La Vista and walk us through the timeline from start to finish.
Sure. So the city of La Vista, Chris and Cale had been working with MAPPA to get a Heartland 2050 mini grant. And as Chris said earlier, it was originally supposed to be a bike and ped plan. And through some additional funding that was made available through the city, they kind of expanded this into this active mobility plan. And so we got started around November of 23 with a project kickoff. And we started doing some data collection over the winter. The project timed out very nicely to be able to hit the active mobility season of people on trails and being active over the summer to do some public involvement. And that's where Cale is going to pick up.
Yeah. We wanted to highlight the public engagement process with this plan and all plans. So just with any planning process, public engagement is vital to making sure you get a good product. It's how you guide your decisions and investments based on what's best for your community and all members of your community, not just those that are able to be most vocal or present. And specific to active mobility, collecting public input is how you find out where there are gaps in your sidewalk network, where you need to have a trail or an improved crosswalk, or where it'd be nice to have a bench so someone can rest while they're midway through their walk or their transportation route. So the people who live in your community and use it and navigate through every day are the ones that have the answers to these questions. So you get the best plan. So we tried to bring everyone together. That's where we started. We held some community stakeholder group workshops where we invited representatives from over 80 different organizations. We had neighborhood and HOA type organizations represented, community organizations of trail users like bicycle and running clubs. We had religious organizations and nonprofits there. We had residents from various groups, individuals from governments from the surrounding communities to make sure that we were adequately planning these connections and coordinating them and maximizing all the resources on a regional level. And so we led those workshops where we divided in groups and got around tables with maps to put some ideas on paper. So we gave them kind of the basic knowledge and understanding of what we were trying to do so we could really compile as many ideas as possible at this stage. We also circulated a survey to reach residents and people who were not able to attend those workshops. So we got about 200 responses. We circulated this through social media. We included it in a newsletter that was mailed out to every residential address in the city. We put yard signs out in our parks and along some of our trails to try and target some of the more active current users of the system who might be more familiar with areas of opportunity for our transportation system. So we had QR codes on those signs. We had little table tents with QR codes that we placed at some of the breweries and different establishments around the city to try and get in front of people and meet them where they are to maximize our engagement with the survey. So what some of the things that we heard about where people were trying to go most, there was a big priority of being able to access recreational opportunities, to get to school, to go to entertainment and dining establishments, to go to some of the breweries that we have around the city. And the biggest priorities from our respondees were to have improved crossings. Safety was a big priority. Better crossings, more sidewalks, more trails and bike lanes. So at the close of that survey and all that initial round of engagement, we had over 80 ideas for infrastructure improvements and for policies that Benish put together after synthesizing all this data. So then we had our technical advisory committee come together and sort through and try and sort them into three different categories or initial phases. So we had projects and policies we put in our potential short term, potential near term, and then long term, just to try and give us a better idea of how to start when it comes to implementation time. So we didn't commit the city or ourselves to any specific time frames for each of these phases because we understand that priorities will change over time and also that so much of our ability to implement this will depend on funding availability and funding sources. So we didn't want to lock in on timing, but having these different phases really helps break it down into smaller pieces. So as the city uses the tools that we have to plan and budget, whether it's a capital improvements program in our budget, we have the ability to get on top of implementation. So once we had those sorted, we entered the next phase of public engagement where we hosted an open house and attended a couple other city events where we asked the public, we showed them the different phases and all the projects in them, and we just asked them, what are you most excited about in each of these phases? We were trying to understand, do we have this correct? Are there things that are identified in long term that really need to be in short term? Did we miss anything through that first round of public engagement? Are there other projects that need to be included in this plan that we didn't have? And through that process, we did end up reorganizing a couple of our projects. There were some things that we realized were a big priority to some areas of the city that we wouldn't have caught had we not gone back to the public, at this midpoint to make sure that we were on the right track. So it's critical to touch back and do some additional engagement if you have that opportunity. And after that, Benish synthesized the rest of the plan and put it together. And then we hosted a joint workshop with our Park and Recreation Advisory Board and our Planning Commission, so two of our public bodies that are appointed. And they were able to review the plan, ask some questions, inform if there were any changes that need to be made. And they both those bodies made recommendations to City Council for approval, and then City Council ultimately reviewed the plan and adopted it, and now it has been incorporated into the city's comprehensive plan. Craig, do you want to talk a little bit more about the specific components that are all in our active mobility plan?
So the plan starts off with some background information, some introduction about why do we improve mobility? Like this is a document that's going to be part of the comprehensive plan. It's going to be part of the planning process for the city of La Vista, and so it needed to have some background as to why we're improving mobility. And really, there's lots of reasons to improve mobility. ADA compliance and the safety and accessibility, intrinsic value, placemaking. So we talked about a lot of these things so that somebody picking up the study in the future could understand why the city was felt that these things were important to improve mobility. We also talked a little bit about how the plan was aligned with the city comprehensive goals and policies. So other documents that the city has put together talk about living, working, playing, the things that make La Vista good and want to improve. And so we aligned all of our project proposals with those policy goals so that you could say, this is why we're doing something because it is in line with the policy goals of the city of La Vista. It does have a section on talking about community engagement. So all the stuff that Cale just talked about, what public surveys were done, when we met with people, it has a documentation of all of that process. It also has a section that talks about the existing resources and documentation. So there's a lot of documentation that this document builds on, including comprehensive plans and land use plans. We also used data. We created a sidewalk gap map analysis of all the places in La Vista that were missing sidewalks or places that were lacking accessibility. Other information from Heartland Bike Share. We used Strava and Ride with GPS to identify places where people were using trails, and then also the implied gaps of people not being able to access on the existing street network because for some reason they felt unsafe or there's a gap, a physical gap. And so we used Strava and Ride with GPS to do that. And then just kind of looking at that regional perspective. Cale mentioned that we had people from the NRD and from other cities involved in our planning process. We want to make sure that our trails don't just stop at the edges of La Vista, that they carry on and are part of a regional network. The plan goes on from there to talk about the different types of facilities that are being proposed. And it's not just about trails. Again, this is a more holistic approach. And so we have trails and shared use paths, sidewalks and streetscape, and that's that area kind of between the street and the building. Safety improvements. This is a group of projects that are specifically aimed at safety, crossing, visibility, things like that. Wayfinding is also very important in improving mobility, so people know where they're going and where they're at, and how they need to get to the place they're going. And then on-street facilities as well. So these are things where you share the road, bike routes, painting. A lot of really quick and easy projects can fit into this category of on-street, but they have to be designed with a special view toward sharing the road with vehicles. And so to get that, we used a lot of national resources. There's a lot of toolkits for these different treatments. We picked and chose those that most were applicable to the city of La Vista. There's obviously things that you might be able to do in Florida that you would not attempt to do here because of snow removal or just the ability to have to repaint things. There's just things that you do in different parts of the country that wouldn't really make sense here. So we used some national resources to come up with these different types of toolkits so that the city would have a good kind of basis to know what kind of projects we're looking at. We didn't just come up with physical projects, so it's not just on the ground construction projects. There's also policies and best practices. So again, looking around the country for those things that improve mobility through legal action, ordinances, things and policies that the city could put into place that aren't necessarily projects. And so we grouped these into 4 different categories: prioritizing infrastructure improvements, advocating for vulnerable road users and ADA compliance. So this is really about policies that would improve safety and improve the space for not just bikes, but if you think about vulnerable road users, these are construction workers, these are people walking in the street or walking through that streetscape area, educating and informing the public, and then just encouraging the use of active mobility. So there's a lot of things that the city can do from a policy standpoint to encourage the use of active mobility, such as putting out more bike racks and putting out bike maps and things like that to educate the public. We also came up with a number of concept projects. And so these were projects that may have had a little bit more, we took a little bit more time to analyze what those projects would be and come up with some potential cost estimates and layouts for several different kinds of projects. And then that kind of all culminated with an ultimate network map. And this is everything that we thought of, policies, projects throughout the entire system. And as Cale mentioned earlier, this is not set up by a 1 to 5 year, 5 to 10 year. This is just kind of overall, but we did break them down into short term, near term, and long term, so that there was a little bit of an idea of these are some things that we can take now and we can tackle now, and then we can build on those projects. And then we can, if we had all the money in the world and all the time in the world and ability, we'd like to do this proposed ultimate network. And that's kind of shown here. If you look at them, it kind of starts in the middle. A lot of the short-term projects are built off of existing trails and existing resources within the city, and then they kind of expand out. But we also tried to make sure that there was kind of parity and balance throughout the city. So it wasn't all just in one certain area of the city, that we were looking for ways to do short-term easy wins throughout the entire city. And then the last section of the plan really is just a lot of information for future planners, design guidelines and resources, ways to talk about funding and partnerships, a list of all of the proposals that are in there with a description, so you could pick up a proposal and move it to the next phase, and a summary and recommendations section. So something that the city can really work toward. Cale and Chris can work over the next number of years and say, we're actually making progress on the overall plan.
Okay, why would an active mobility plan be more appropriate to rural communities than a trails plan?
I'll take that one on, Chris. Typically in a rural community, you may not have a very robust trail system. You're probably going to have a lot of sidewalks. The community may have been developed in a time where there weren't sidewalks. You may have an interface between the county and the city where, like, the county part of the developments just did not have requirements for sidewalks at all. You may not really have access to a trail, or there might be a trail, but it's kind of farther away from the city. And so looking at a whole trail network might be kind of daunting to a rural community. And I think that looking at it from this lens of active mobility, let's look at our citizens, let's look at the residents, let's look at the people that are visiting our city. If they come to our city, how do they get from gas station to the library, or from the downtown over to the commercial district, or something like that? And then really looking at this healthy lifestyle kind of way, and you can implement these smaller projects for safety, for visibility, accessibility, wayfinding, things like that you wouldn't really have if you're just looking at it purely from a trails perspective.
Yeah, Craig and I actually go on RAGBRAI each year, which is the ride across Iowa, bike ride across Iowa. And there's been a number of times where he and I have pointed out these sidewalk gaps in these small little towns that you really think, okay, that's where you're having some active mobility issues, is how are people going to get around, not just on bikes, not just pedestrian scale wise, but those who have mobility issues? How are they getting around without the proper sidewalk system? Or if there's a swale system rather than a storm sewer system set up, how are they getting around that aspect to get where they need to go? And so, an active mobility plan is what Craig was talking about in these small towns is way more important than a trails plan. You need to think about the entire system comprehensively.
Yeah, and we spent a good deal amount of time in La Vista looking at non-trail users. Not the Lycra spandex, cycling community. We had people on our stakeholder group who were mobility users, medical mobility users, and giving us ideas about how they can get around and improving the sidewalks. Like a small bump in the sidewalk gap is a huge problem for us. And so looking at those things and even just the physical space, I'm thinking of one time this summer when Chris and I were on Ragbri in Iowa, and we were walking down a sidewalk, just walking down a sidewalk, and right next to us was a utility pole, and the guy wires from the utility pole cut kind of right through the physical space of walking through the sidewalk. And I can think, how would that affect people in that town? So just different ways to think about it and improve mobility for all users in your town.
Many rural communities cannot afford to do full-scale active mobility planning. What can they do instead to improve active mobility throughout their community?
Yeah, I think that you don't necessarily have to do a full scale plan in order to get started. It can start as simply as asking the question, asking some questions at a board or a town hall meeting. Where would it be nice to have sidewalks? Like, where are people trying to get to? And usually you're going to start by focusing around schools and downtowns where walkability and safety is especially important to making a thriving community. Or maybe you engage with law enforcement or individuals who are going to be really familiar about where, maybe there's specific intersections that you have more crashes, or there was, somewhere where there was an injury accident that it's easy to uncover those things because the people who live there know about them, and start small. Start by having the conversation. There's a lot of things that you can do with paint and signage if that's all you can afford. And so, but just by avoiding it, then you're not getting anywhere. So starting the conversation is the best place.
Yeah. And I also think that getting a group of people together, whether it's two, whether it's five, whether it's 10, just to walk the community. Most of y'all are going to know your community already, but to actually just walk the community and see those guide wires that Craig was just talking about firsthand and brainstorm on ways to get around that issue or any other issue that's out there. Just have a walkthrough and then prioritizing those issues as you see fit. Um,
Also,
so
there are so many resources that are already available as far as recommending solutions to different issues. And like Craig had discussed, there's a whole section in our plan that links to different resources and guides. And so start there. Even, if you've uncovered where there are issues, pull out our plan and go to that section of other resources, and it'll take you to places. You don't have to create your own plan to get access to those.
good point. Good point.
Good point.
So why should rural communities invest in active mobility plans?
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons to invest in active mobility plans, and then ultimately, ideally, the actual active mobility infrastructure. One big one here in La Vista is recreation. Younger generations are really prioritizing experiences and things around experiences. And so having opportunities for exercise and to be outside and to meet your neighbors, it builds a really strong sense of place. And something that is really important to keeping small communities going, is having people love where they're at and they wanting to stay there. Transportation, of course, is important. Having the ability for people to get around safely without a vehicle if they need to, or if they want to. I know a lot of people need to walk to school, or maybe their vehicle breaks down, or they can't afford a vehicle, and so having the ability to get around safely is very important. And another one is economic development. There's a lot of a whole culture sprouting up around cycling and running, outside, utilizing trails, even places where there aren't trails, and riding on gravel, whether it's these large organized rides like RAGBRAI. There's smaller ones popping up. There's taco rides and nacho rides popping up all
Yep.
over the country in rural areas where you get a group of people together, you identify this 10-mile segment on gravel where you can ride to the small town bar, and on a Tuesday or Thursday night, and it's this whole growing movement that can create a lot of awareness about your small town. It can be great for all the businesses in your small town, and it's another reason why we looked into this active mobility plan is we've got a high concentration of breweries and these entertainment establishments in the area, and people love to be able to go to those places on a bike or walking. So recreation, transportation, and economic development are all great reasons to invest in active mobility.
And I
Yeah,
think
going back
what
to
I think
that.
like I said, and building on that, when you talk about these rural communities and where your where your resources lie, um, there's a lot of regional and national trails. You think about the Great American Rail Trail, the American Discovery Trail. You think about a lot of places over in Iowa, and even here in Nebraska, we've got the Cowboy Trail, which is a nationally recognized trail. And if you're 2 miles away from that, you are just missing out on that. Like that, you're just that last little bit away from a bunch of people being able to come into your community, or in your community being able to access that. I think about places in central Nebraska as well, like Central City and Palmer and Marquette, now being connected by the Dark Island Trail. They've created like just what Kale said, they've created this whole new community around runners and bikers being able to go 7 miles, right? 7 miles, you're not going to jump in a car and go drive down to Marquette to go have a pizza, but you're going to jump on a bike, you're going to run, and you're going to have now you've extended the reach of your community that much further. And just to think about, if you're only a couple miles off of one of these major regional trails, it could be a major economic development potential for your community.
Yeah, I completely agree. Addressing economic development in these plans is entirely important. Take, for instance, Mineola, Iowa, who does the taco ride that Kayla was talking about earlier, where people ride out from Council Bluffs, Iowa, part of the Omaha metropolitan area, out to Mineola for tacos. And not only does it help the local businesses because they stop elsewhere than to pick up tacos, it also helps the sales tax of the community as well. So economic development is a strong part of these plans that needs to be incorporated. Name some ways to fund improvements related to projects called out in these types of plans.
So in the active mobility plan that we gave, that we prepared for La Vista, there is a list of national, federal, state, and local funding resources, and this ranges from kind of the big ticket projects, like the several $1 million projects that raise grants and ATIP funding. Also programs like TAP, there's the Transportation Alternatives Program, new grant programs coming out through Safe Streets for All. There's obviously a lot of money out there right now through the bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law, things like that, or CMAQ, congestion mitigation and air quality improvement to reduce vehicle miles traveled, things like that. So there's a lot of these big funding resources that are out there, but there's also more localized. So you could, like here in Nebraska, we have recreational trails program, 6F, land and water conservation funding stuff. These mini grants through your MPO or just local philanthropic community organizations. So anybody with a foundation, a community foundation, groups that get together. Again, I'm thinking of like the Dark Island Trail was funded and purchased by the Platte River Peer Group, or just economic development grants, CDBG funds, and things like that could also be used to fund fun projects. And then I would also kind of point out regional partnerships. So if you are that community that is 5 miles away from another community, you shouldn't have to pay the whole 5 miles, right? Like get together with that other community and say, hey, if we pool our resources, we can fill this 5 mile gap a lot faster. And so looking at those ways to come up with partnerships, creating that overall community and finding ways to fund projects is also a way to do that.
Yeah, funding is an important part, and don't go it alone. It's make sure that you reach out to your local organizations that are out there to help you. In Iowa, they got Council of Governments. Other states, they have regional planning associations, RPAs, that can help you with that grant writing process. There's other nonprofits that can help with that grant writing process to get those funds to make those things work. Other than that, I don't think I have anything else. Any other further points on active mobility planning or La Vista's active mobility planning that you want to point out? All right.
I think the only the last thing that I would say is celebrate your wins. I'm thinking back to one of the projects that the city of La Vista worked on here recently that we had the opportunity to work on them with. It was the Applewood Trail. It was done before the mobility plan. It was based off of a very long time plan to kind of fill a gap between several neighborhoods. And at the end of it, they had members of the community, and Kale was out there, and we had a ribbon, and we cut it, and it got on the news, and it was fantastic. And you heard people talking about it for on the news and in the community afterwards. So I'd say celebrate your wins. It builds on itself because now that that trail is in, people are using it, and there were new ideas and things that came out of that trail that are now being explored for further connections. And so you kind of never know where the trail is going to lead you. And as much as this plan has like what looks like a 25-year plan all set in stone, it's going to change. There's going to be things that happen along the way. And so be open to that and be flexible as you move through the process. But I'd say definitely start with celebrating the wins and patting yourself on the back and getting some good press on what you're doing, and people will come alongside and support you.
Well, I want to thank Craig Melky and Cale Broderson for talking about La Vista's active mobility plan today. If you like this video and you want to see more, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. It helps this channel quite a bit.